If you've been in comics long enough, although it's not really true today, but if we can just wind the clock back to about 2010 and before, there was always this kind of Marvel versus DC competition or attitude amongst fans. Why? Why didn't people just gravitate toward characters? Why companies? Let's talk about that. One of the things that I find really, really strange is that people get attached to a comic publisher as opposed to the comics themselves. And we've been kind of drifting away from that. But if you can remember back to like the 80s or the 90s, there was kind of a fierce loyalty of Marvel versus DC. And even within the comic shop, people would come in and kind of the DC fans would think the Marvel fans are kind of childish. And the Marvel fans would think the DC fans were kind of like boring comics. It's like it was an interesting dynamic because Marvel would present itself as the world outside your window. DC would present itself as the more kind of, I don't want to say fantasy, but the bigger world that is not bound by current reality. And yet DC comics were seen as for grown-ups and Marvel for teens. This is kind of how the argument would play out. And I remember hearing a lot of these arguments, kind of a bemused smile on my face because it always felt like the comic publishers had done an effective job of getting people to fight over something pointless. And that's what this felt like. It felt like something pointless. Loyalty to the publisher always seemed slightly ridiculous when it's really the comics you're going to read. And there's always kind of three stages. This is very, very general way of talking, but generally, people would come in, they'd start with Marvel, they'd kind of mature into DC, and then they would mature into just buying whatever they wanted and not caring anymore. that always seemed like the final state of the whole thing. But it was interesting in the 80s and 90s. You had very tribal kind of things, and when they did do a Marvel and DC kind of combo comic book, when the publishers worked together, it actually felt like a bigger deal because it felt like these rivals were, coming together for the good of storytelling or the good of something entertaining for the fans. And that was a cool moment. Whereas today, if people did that, if they came together, I don't think it would have anywhere close to the same significance because, the rivalry just isn't there at the same time. It's funny when you see Tom Brevoort in particular, Dan Didio would do it every now and then, Joe Quesada, they kind of throw shade at the distinguished competition, or, it felt really hollow. In the last 10 years or so, it always felt like people were kind of playing at being kind of against each other. And yet behind the scenes now, at the retailer level, when you go to some of these summits, there would be some nasty kind of back and forth. Axel Alonso did some kind of nasty things to people at DC at the time, and vice versa. There was lots of kind of real pettiness that was very much hidden from the fans. But on the surface, it's like everybody's kind of getting along. It just felt like the dumbest of all feuds. And maybe now with, that's actually one interesting bit. Now that we have DC breaking away from Diamond, doing their own thing, maybe this brings back that kind of different spirit of competition for the fans. I don't know. The other argument is, does it even matter? In today's day and age, do we really want to have that rivalry? Does it bring money in? Does it bring interest in or value? I don't think so. I mean, I don't think any of this actually brings cash into the door. So, why do it in the first place is a good way to do it. But it is peculiar to me. I used this analogy once. It's funny because people like to argue, and not to go too heavy into politics, of like Democrat and Republican. And I think for some people, and myself, I'll count, this is me for sure, I start to just look cynical about everybody. Like I find people and things to hate about both parties pretty easily. And then every now and then somebody will push me into like, yeah, but don't you hate this party more than you hate the other party? It's like, I mean, each party has actions in it that's pretty reprehensible. And I certainly like this party does this better. Weirdly, it feels like the Republican Party somehow has become more of the free speech party, which is just head spinning. If you're over the age of 20, that makes no sense that we're here. But okay, it just there's things that one party does in the other. But it's kind of like saying, hey, would you like to be shot in the leg or the arm? And you start like, well, yeah, I guess the arm would be a little bit better, but really you don't want to get shot at all. And to me, that's a little bit what this comics rivalry feels like. It's like, unless we're talking about the comics and like this comic is good, this comic is good. If we're talking at the publisher level, I mean, it's just like, hey, who do you think's actions are better for creators, Marvel or DC? It's like, well, I mean, I don't really like what either of them do in many cases. Who's better at managing some of this outrage? Who's cleaning up the hiring practices like we've been talking about? Who's better at it? It's like, well, company over here has hired some, real scumbags and kind of let them loose and, doesn't really do anything to rein them in. And company B over here has an editor that they kept on for a long time, even though it was clear there was a problem. But, maybe that's not as bad as this other company over here that has, Max Bemis. But there's Scott Lobdell over here. I mean, it's like, Jesus. I mean, at some point, your head explodes, right? Of like, hey, who's really handling this better? By the way, to be clear, just for the record, because there's a lot of stories going out right now about all these people, including Max Bemis and Scott Lobdell, two names I just casually mentioned. Probably shouldn't have done it that way. We'll see how all these allegations ultimately unfold and what has merit and what has not, but. I probably wronged me. I'll cop that. I wronged me just toss names out. I'm literally tossing names out that are on my screen at this exact moment because people are complaining about it. My point here in all this is, what does comic publisher loyalty really mean if you're a fan? Now, if you're a creator and one treats you better because the mechanism there is better than the other, okay, totally get that. Totally. I understand definitely having loyalty to a publisher. In fact, I understand, having fierce long-term loyalty to a publisher that treats you better over the other. Totally understand. But at the reader level, at the comic collector level, does loyalty, does that stuff make any sense at all? I mean, I don't think so. But what about you? So first off, a couple of questions. One, do you like one company more than the other? And by the way, let's expand it out. I mean, throw Image in there, boom, IDW. Who's a publisher you really like and why? And then my other question for you, maybe the more important one is, does the publisher matter? Or is it the book? Is it the creative team that you follow? Do you really care? Do you feel like when it gets into this which publisher do you like better question, that you're kind of being forced to, pick a game that you don't really want to play? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment below if you wouldn't mind. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter or Facebook at Comic Perch. And hey, thanks for listening.